Hi, my name is Anne McElhinney.
And I'm Phelim, and welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop. We have a great show for you today.
You know the way people say we have a great show for you today and they don't then have a great show? We actually genuinely do have a great show.
Yes.
Yeah, we do.
We do. We have some great guests on today. Two fantastic interviews. First of all, with the great Mollie Hemingway, one of the best writers and journalists working in the United States today. And one of the best analysts of how the rest of the media work or don't work in the United States today. So we're going to talk to her about how badly the mainstream media has been covering the pandemic and why their attempts to get Trump, are backfiring, exposing their incompetence and the utter
Trump derangement syndrome that they're suffering from, and that is becoming really exposed through these weeks of the pandemic.
Yeah, and of course Mollie wrote the definitive book on the Bret Kavanaugh nomination to the Supreme Court.
Oh yeah, so we asked her the question, because of the fact that she had obviously analysed the media and how they treated Blasey Ford and Bret Kavanaugh at the time. We're asking now because apparently similarly we've got now Tara Reade, who has made these very serious sexual allegations against the presumptive Democratic presidential candidate, Joe Biden. And, we ask Mollie Hemingway the question, is the treatment the same? And shocker, spoiler alert.
There is a huge difference between the treatment of a conservative Republican accused of sexual assault and a Democrat accused of sexual assault. So we cover a lot of ground with Mollie, including homeschooling tips and what her next book might be about. And actually, you'll like that. It's something very near and dear to our hearts. We also interview Marc Morano of the Climate Skeptic Climate Depot website and hear how some are using the pandemic shutdowns as a kind of dry run for similar restrictions for the forthcoming climate emergency. Yeah, because if you can shut down America for a public health emergency, why wouldn't climate be a public health emergency? So we'll hear about that. So let's get on with the show. Crazy world, oil prices at record low. We just want to send out all our support, as much support as we can to all the oil and gas workers out there, all the energy workers out there. We know we have a lot of listeners from that industry, and please, I hope your industry turns around soon.
Yeah, and just on that point, I mean, when we were making the film Frack Nation, we travelled all over the country and met with oil and gas workers. And I actually got a massive education ourselves on the oil and gas sector in America and realised that you're talking about a million people who work in the oil and gas sector. And these are people from drivers to drillers to, every kind of wildcatters, all these people that are out there who now, are in this really dire situation. And I just think, anti-fossil fuel zealots, who always talk about, who basically think that the oil and gas industry is some extended version of the Dallas show that was made with JR and
or a monopoly board with people in cigars, smoking cigars in rooms. It's not. It's a million people and a million families. But then they give jobs to hairdressers, to
local stores, to foot repair people, to every kind of thing, every possible thing. So anyway, we're doing a big shout out to all those people and lots of our friends who are involved in the oil and gas business across the country that we've met when we were on our travels. So we really feel for you guys, along with all the other sectors that are so incredibly badly hit by this pandemic, or by the government response to this pandemic, I should say.
And on that note, we're looking at people. A lot of people are still protesting. We see that, and let's be clear: they are focused on states where governors have become drunk on power and where have introduced arbitrary and capricious regulations. And also, they've been focused on places where, you cannot treat the rest of America as if it's New York. The disease is running rampant in New York. But there are huge parts of the country where there have been relatively few cases, and hospitals, rather than overflowing, are remarkable because they are empty. So, the media, of course, is making this out to be these heartless protesters controlled by evil billionaires who want to open the wheels of industry. No, these are people saying, look, this is not the same as New York. This is not the same as New Jersey. There are very few cases here. We can keep this with social distancing. We can keep this under control. We have the facilities here to handle this. Open up our world, and it's wonderful to see people protesting and having this debate rather than it being closed down. So before we go to the interview with Mollie Hemingway, I just wanted to bring your attention to something from across the pond, a poll that was released this week in the UK. The Prime Minister there is like a lot of leaders in the world these days, very, very unpopular with everyone except the general public. So Boris Johnson, the media hate him, the literati hate him, the glitterati hate him, the lovies...
Twitterati hate him.
Every atty hates him, except the general public. He was elected with a massive majority. So you may or may not know that the British opposition party, the Labour Party, has just chosen a new leader, and his name is Keir Starmer. Or to give him his proper name and title, he is Sir Keir Rodney Starmer, KCB PC QC. That is the truth. That is actually his full name. And yes, that is who is leading the supposed party of the working class these days in the UK. So this poll asked who would make a better Prime Minister, the best Prime Minister. And you can read more about this poll actually in The Spectator. This is where I saw this story. So in The Spectator UK magazine. So who would make the best Prime Minister? And Mr. Starmer did the remarkable thing of coming third in a 2-horse race, which is a pretty good achievement.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Yeah, coming third. Yeah, in a 2-horse race. So the 2-horse race, obviously Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer. Who would make the best Prime Minister? Boris Johnson 46%, Keir Starmer 22%. But in the number 2 position, it's this guy called Not Sure. Mr. Not Sure, who got 28%. So Mr. Not Sure is a more popular choice for Prime Minister than Keir Starmer. So that'll tell you all you need to know about Keir Starmer right now. But let's go over now. We need to go over right now to this great interview we have with the great and brilliant Mollie Hemingway that we recorded just before we came on air. So let's go there right now.
So we're joined now by Mollie Hemingway, and Mollie Hemingway is a best-selling author, columnist, political commentator. She's a senior editor at the online magazine The Federalist, which is has been must-read since before the election, for the election, and for the Russia collusion story, and now for the virus story. We could spend an awful lot of the podcast just talking about Mollie's work and achievements. The thing I like about her, one of my favorite pieces of information is she's one of an elite group of authors. A book, Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court, has the elite status. The first mention of her book in the New York Times was when it appeared in the New York Times bestsellers list. Yeah. So they ignored it. They would not review it. They wouldn't even write a news story about it. And suddenly it appears. Suddenly the readers are going, what is this book that we see as number 3 in the bestsellers list? So this is, actually, that really sums up the disservice bad journalism does to its readers.
It is great to be here with you, and it's great to see you guys.
Thank you so much. How are you coping with the lockdown, Mollie?
Well, I'm okay. I mean, I'm very aware that many people are out of work and aren't able to pay their bills. And so I hate even saying it, but because of our positions, we're fine. We already work from home and we're already kind of homebodies. But yes. We've been doing this for more than a month. We started, I think, a little earlier than many other people did. And so we are very much ready for things to change. Thank God that where we live did not end up being what they predicted. And so I think it's time to come up with a better plan. So
you might be even, so we're 4 weeks in, basically 4 weeks in, and a couple of days, and we've 4 more weeks to go, which is, and it's funny. I feel like I've been saying that we do a daily podcast called The Daily Virus, and we're basically realizing that it comes a time, I don't know, the first 4 weeks, and I think there's so many things will come out of this, by the way. There'll be so much research done. People are we've been really, really marking on that, how quickly people will take instruction and do what they're told. It's extraordinary. The whole of America have taken this stuff, but they're coming. It's almost like this moment where it's like, okay, I've taken enough now. I'm ready.
Well, I think people really did pay attention to what they were told, and what they were told was, initially to expect 2 to 4 million deaths, and then that got dramatically revised down. It kind of keeps getting revised down. The flattening the curve was about making sure hospitals are not over capacity, and certainly in New York City, that's a very bad situation, extremely rough situation. And there are also rough situations in other hospitals. But the bigger hospital concern for a lot of people is that hospitals are closing or they're not seeing patients. And so people really, when you put your whole life on hold because people tell you that you have to, you pay attention to the details. And it's important, I think, for people who want a particular public health outcome to be as honest and transparent about what they're saying and also what they got wrong.
I suppose we should talk about the media's handling of it, because people get a lot of their information from the media. You've been calling the media out on their coverage of pre-election, how they got it wrong, post-election, how they got it wrong. You've also been calling out them over the Russia collusion, how they got that wrong, and how they should self-examine and wonder why they got it wrong. And have they learned any lessons? Has the coverage of the virus been any different? What's wrong with it, and what have they not learned?
Right. I've been a media critic for a really long time. So it used to be that people didn't know what that was, and now everybody understands what that role is. But I think there are certain issues that are just endemic to our media where they have trouble. They like scandal, or they lack the ability to handle nuance or context on a good day, even if it has nothing to do with politics. There's a propensity to talk about death and destruction. That's not their fault. That's actually just human nature. If it bleeds, it leads. We like to read about death and destruction, and so they're just matching what the people want.
We're Irish, so we particularly have an affinity. We have affection for disaster, and death, destruction, and despair is like our thing.
Told in detail. Yeah. Anne's mother was the nicest.
Excruciating detail.
Yes, Anne's mother was the nicest woman on the planet, but she would literally go in the morning to wake Anne up, and
her thing was, do you know that guy, the guy down the road? Do you know the guy with the limp? You know that guy? And I'm going, no, what guy? You know the guy and he wears the red hat? Oh yeah, him. Dead.
Decapitated.
So she'd line up the whole thing. You know that thing about the fella that was there and they were going, dead.
Car accident outside Donegal, 4 people dead, all teenagers, one of them decapitated. Mother just died last week. Dead. Huge tragedy for the family.
All right. But yes, so we do get that, and it does seem to be, and obviously it's a general thing. But Sorry.
So how tell us about how, given that propensity,
I'm just saying this is all, even if there weren't the political issue in play, I don't think our media are particularly good at understanding scientific discussions or how to analyze whether opinions that you're getting from scientists are good or bad. They're just not very good at that on any day. When you add into it their quest to destroy Donald Trump, it just makes most of the coverage, frankly, worthless, because it's not, what's motivating them is not public health or how to convey information properly or how to be balanced. It's literally just, how can we turn this into a disaster for Donald Trump? Now, maybe it should be. I don't think so, but maybe it should be. But you just can't take them seriously, given that everything has been viewed through that prism for the last several years.
And I don't know. It's a huge topic, but it's interesting to us as well to notice that it's not just the American media. By the way, the UK and Ireland are at this stuff as well. And and I'm sure there's loads of examples you can give, but one example that I think is very telling is the number of news, very respected news outlets across the planet who have breathlessly reported on the United States of America has the largest death toll. And for me, that headline is so dishonest. It is so intellectually bankrupt. It is such a lie. It's sinful. It's just so evil that they put that. But can you explain that one to me?
Things that I thought was interesting was a few weeks ago, Donald Trump had said something like, we've done more tests than any other country. And that's true, but everyone pointed out, well, not by a per capita basis. So he's a liar is what they would say. I thought, well, if this makes them suddenly start to evaluate things based on a per capita basis, that would be great. But it turned out, no, it was only going to be per capita if it was something you could use against Donald Trump. It was still going to be the same ridiculous approach to numbers elsewhere. But the main issue that you bring up there is, it would be absurd to think that the place where the virus started, in the Wuhan region in China, that those numbers would not be catastrophic. The idea that it would spread to other countries on a delayed basis and be catastrophic there, but not in China, it just doesn't make any sense unless there's something really bad going on, like they had I definitely don't think this is true. The only way their numbers make sense would be if they had like a secret cure that they were withholding from the rest of the world. I don't think that's happening. So a rational person would look at this and say the communist Chinese government is lying. It's what they do. Everything else we know about how this is spread everywhere else is different than what they're telling us in China, the actual place where it started and spread. And, the idea that it would spread to Italy and the United States and France, but not to other regions of China, also makes no sense whatsoever. And I just don't understand why our media are so gullible to be like, well, the commies in China said this number, so we're going to believe it. There's nothing in their history that should make you believe those numbers.
It's just, to me, it's unbelievable. We've said this from our daily podcast. Our one line that we constantly say to people is how it is possible for sophisticated journalists who know the world, who've travelled the world, to report breathlessly what the Communist Party of China is putting out as talking points without an asterisk, without just an asterisk, at least an asterisk to say, oh, by the way, this is a tyrannical regime where they kill their own people and have done in the past and have lied in the past. And by the way, here's the thing I'm going to throw out, New York Times, So when we look at the numbers per capita of dead, in China, it's 1 per million. Maybe we should pause a moment here and worry about the numbers that they're sending out. No one's saying that. I can't believe it. I mean, I really can't believe it. I mean, these are these Pulitzer Prize winning journalists. I think Donald Trump yesterday said at the press conference to somebody, you need to give back your Pulitzer Prize. All these people need to give back their Pulitzer Prizes who are not calling out China, who are not making this all about China.
Well, it's also seen in how they covered the issue with the World Health Organization. And so I thought when President Trump and other people were criticizing the World Health Organization, I saw someone joke, there's no way our media are going to start defending the World Health Organization now, are they? Oh, it took like 5 minutes total before they did. And that relationship with China, I think, is particularly troublesome. We're obviously the main funders. The United States are the main funders of the World Health Organization. A lot of people across the political spectrum wonder if we're getting anything in return that we should be getting for the amount of money that we're spending for them. But the World Health Organization, I'm surprised journalists aren't more upset with them. They are the reason why their believing of who is the reason why they didn't say what they should have been saying in January or February. You would think journalists would hold them more accountable for sort of those false reports that they had. And then there was do you remember that interview early on with the head COVID guy where he pretended Taiwan didn't exist, which is a communist Chinese position.
We can't hear you now, Mollie.
Yeah, I'm having trouble. It's cracking up. Yeah. And these are really serious, horrible things that you should not ever allow yourself to be beholden to such lies from communist Chinese government. And yet a lot of people are. So it's not just about the numbers China is reporting. There's a whole range of issues here that are not being covered properly because of, for some reason, our media hate this administration so much that they're even willing to side with commies in China who are really being horrible to their people over the truth.
I suppose we shouldn't be that surprised because they've failed to learn any lessons or accept that they've got anything wrong in the last. And I suppose I meant to mention this when we're introducing you. Mollie is probably better known to many of our listeners and viewers as the inspiration for the blogger in the Gosnell movie. All you people out there have seen the Gosnell movie, and I realized we interviewed Mollie about 6 months ago on our podcast, and we got so carried away talking about everything else, we never even mentioned the Gosnell movie. Yeah. So that gives you an example of Mollie's achievements and her breadth of interest. Yeah. But actually, when you think about Gosnell, that was another example. The reason you got involved, and maybe the reason we got involved, was the media malpractice. Actually, forget about pro-life this and pro-life. It was the media. It was the lack of media coverage of it that attracted all our interests, really.
So I think, one of the things you hear people say when people in the media say in response to criticism that they're receiving in this moment, they say, well, our job isn't to be helpful to the administration. And it's like, well, of course your job is not to be helpful to the administration. Yes. Your problem is that you only pick certain targets to be antagonistic toward. You take something like the Gosnell situation, which just had news this week with the release of some documents showing that Planned Parenthood did in fact pay or get paid for body parts. So you could have freshened up those stories and rolled it out again. They don't hold their friends at Planned Parenthood accountable. They only hold their political enemies. They're not even that they're doing a good job of holding anyone accountable.
Yes.
Like I said, there are probably plenty of things that could be done responsibly about failures at the federal, state, and local level. You're just not seeing it happen.
But I want to talk about Joe Biden now and another example of media malpractice. But is there any good journalist, any mainstream journalist getting this right or asking the right question?
I don't know. I have started in recent weeks or recent months subscribing to the Wall Street Journal. And I will say that you do notice, and I'm talking about the news page, not the editorial page, you notice just a much more responsible approach to their news. So if you read the front page of the New York Times or Washington Post, it's just histrionic. It's like absolutely hysterical coverage and so partisan and so political. And at the Wall Street Journal, it's sort of here's factually what's happening. And I appreciate that so much. And so I do think they're doing, just from what I've been reading, a better job than what I read in the New York Times.
And we'd recommend the Epoch Times. We've had Jan Jekielek from the Epoch Times on here talking, and they're very good, obviously, on digging deep into what's going on in China. And speaking about some heroes, by the way, in China, that no one, I just find it amazing when you think that there are people, whistleblowers in China that have gone missing. I mean, it's really serious. And that the whole world, that the New York Times doesn't have photographs of these wonderful human beings who are missing, and is asking that they should every day have a photograph up of those missing people saying, where are they? Day 17 missing. This doctor is missing.
I saw a good interview done by Jonathan Swan of a Chinese diplomat where he flat out asked him about certain journalists that had been disappeared. And the guy claimed he didn't even know these names. And Swan came prepared and he said, well, you already asked about them a few weeks ago, so I know you know who we're talking about. It was very tense, and it's understandable when you're dealing with a regime like the communist government of China. It's going to be a tense interaction and altercation, but you still have to, for people who pride themselves on being able to speak truth to power, this is your time, and go ahead and do it.
Yes, yeah. I think as I say about Hollywood actors, after all the awards you've given each other for bravery, it'd be nice if you actually did something brave, and shouting loudly about Donald Trump is not brave. Actually, shouting loudly in support of Donald Trump is really brave in Hollywood. That's what you need the real bravery awards for. So we'll try and leave the virus there for now. But, get back to a similar topic. You wrote a brilliant book about Bret Kavanaugh's confirmation hearings, Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court. And it's still selling. I do still check its rating on Amazon. And I so enjoy how well it's doing against the New York Times one. Was it Education on Trial or the Education of Bret
Kavanaugh?
Yeah. I mean,
the authors of that book probably do not like Carrie and me, my co-author, very much, but
I mean, it's a wonderful. I mean, that's a great example of how to dissect bad journalism. I don't think we've got time here to go into it, but the book came out was excerpted in the New York Times, which is normal, and excerpted their book and excerpted dishonestly. And Mollie did a wonderful job over a weekend of highlighting that, and then over the next week just
with an assist from you, by the way. You were the person who listened to the NPR interview. They had been dishonest in the excerpt in the New York Times, and they claimed it was an editing error. But you had listened to the full hour-long interview that they did on NPR, where they had all the time in the world to give all the nuance and context they needed to, and they didn't do it, which showed this wasn't just this was not an error that they could blame on their editor. This was their own error in how they were presenting it.
No, well, thank you very much for that praise. I mean, I have to say, I came in late. I came in about the Wednesday and Thursday. Just someone once described liberal columnists, their job is to bayonet the wounded, right? When somebody's really down, they come in with this high fluid. So I think I bayoneted the wounded there. I spotted something else and they were down, and I just helped you twist the knife, which is not my it's okay. I had to do it. It's a dirty job. So let's talk about Tara Reade. So for people out there who don't know who Tara Reade is, she is the woman who is alleging sexual assault, serious sexual assault by Joe Biden when she was a Senate staffer, when she worked for him in 1993, I believe. So talk to us about the difference between the media's handling of the Bret Kavanaugh assault allegations and the Joe Biden's.
Yeah, I don't know how much needs to be revisited because we all lived through it. That when someone came forth with no evidence claiming that she had been sexually assaulted by Bret Kavanaugh when she was a teenager and he was in high school, also, no evidence in support of it. She had witnesses who all said they didn't recall such a thing or actually repudiated what she claimed to have had happened. The media ran utterly wild with the allegation. Again, no evidence in support of it. There remains no evidence in support of it years later. And yet we had tens of thousands or maybe even more articles written, all the hours spent on TV, everything being analyzed through what was at that time the hashtag believe all women, meaning believe all women, even if they have no evidence, and use it to destroy someone's life. And what was alleged about Bret Kavanaugh on air and in print was shocking to a lot of people. Just again, because it's one thing to make a claim, it's entirely another to make a claim when you don't have support for the claim. And yet many people in the media threw those standards out. So now you have a situation that holds them to account. You have a woman who has a allegation from a much more recent past, from a time when Joe Biden was not just an adult, but in his 50s as a U.S. senator. She likewise, as with many situations here, doesn't have evidence in support of it, except that she told 3 people at the time it happened, which they say is right. And she actually has evidence, unlike Christine Blasey Ford, who accused Bret Kavanaugh, that she has met Joe Biden. She actually worked for him, and nobody disputes that. And so, by any standard, if you thought it was okay to just destroy Bret Kavanaugh's life, you have even more of a case to do that here with the Tara Reade situation. I actually don't advocate that in either case. I think that anyone who's accused of a vicious crime should have due process, and that we should be very careful before we ruin people's lives. But here we have the same media that really shocked the world with how vicious they were and how evil and vile, now doing their level best to destroy not Joe Biden, but Tara Reade, his accuser. And so you had the New York Times and Washington Post enforce a pretty strict blackout for 19 days, finally breaking the news about this allegation once the Democratic primary was over. And they did it on Easter Sunday, which is not known as a big news day. And they had a totally different tone to them. So with the Bret Kavanaugh story, it was told in the most sympathetic, heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching manner. For Tara Reade, you just get these dry descriptions. She makes an allegation. Here's why we sort of don't believe her. And it was just night and day between these two things. And those are the media outlets that actually did finally cover it. You also have other outlets like CNN that had done 705 stories on Christine Blasey Ford and not one on Tara Reade.
Oh God, it's unbelievable. And I thought there was a detail as well about Tara Reade's story that I thought was really interesting. Again, as you say, there was nothing on Blasey Ford. She had nothing. But I think the Tara Reade thing, where she had a job as a junior staffer, and she supervised interns or whatever, and that when she made the complaint, after the complaint, that job was taken off her. Even questions about that, like how did something happened. For sure something happened, because her behaviour and how she was treated there changed after she made the complaint. And there's no suggestion that her work had failed. There's no suggestion of any sense that anything else was going into the pot for them to make this decision.
Well, actually, also, there's a thing for journalists out there. Check that detail out. Was she moved?
If that had been the case with Bret Kavanaugh, he might be in prison right now by their standards. it would be lights out. It's a done deal. But for her case, then they come up with all these reasons for why it doesn't mean what she says it means. And, I actually do think journalists should be skeptical when presented with stories. They just can't do it this way, where they are only skeptical when their friends are accused of horrible assaults, but they throw all of that completely out the window and join the mob when it's their political enemies.
As you say, they've covered it now, Easter Sunday, in a very dry, bland way. And now this allows them to later on say, we covered that story.
And they're already doing that. I think this is interesting. So first thing we should also make sure we remember is that the New York Times removed important information from their story and from their social media at the request of the Biden campaign. There was no dispute that what they removed was factual. So the part that they removed was acknowledging that many other women had accused Joe Biden of inappropriate touching. And that's something, that is in the public record. There's no reason why you wouldn't include it in a story about sexual assault if you're going to cover it. And yet they removed it, and they admitted, Dean Baquet the executive editor, admitted he did it because the Biden campaign asked for it. Somehow I don't think they had that same approach to what got left in stories when it came to Bret Kavanaugh. You had mentioned the thing about this, they can now say that they've covered it and they get to move on. You saw Democratic politicians actually saying that in response to the questions. So first off, when the allegation first comes out, they get 3 weeks of no coverage at all, where every single Republican official in the world, in the country, would be asked to explain whether they support or oppose this person. You didn't have that, even though there was a primary going on. And then when it comes out, finally, they do this dry reporting, and it enables all the politicians to say, oh, that's already been thoroughly investigated, and I don't think there's anything to worry about there. Are you kidding me? Like, this is the disparity is infuriating.
Yeah, no, it's extraordinary. But we're running out of time, actually. Right, I'm realizing here, and I really do not want this interview to end without you. As I said, I kind of was saying to myself, it's really funny, and obviously the memes are very funny about homeschooling, about people who've suddenly been forced into these positions of becoming homeschooling teachers and administrators of where they have larger families. Do you have any tips? I know you have 2 children. Have you any tips? What now that you've been forced into becoming a homeschool teacher, and your husband, I'm sure, is helping with that as well. Any tips?
The only actual tip I have is that my husband and I finally figured out last week that we should alternate days of duty. So as it was happening, and you know how it is when you're a writer, you need to kind of get into a groove. You need time to get in your head, and every few minutes, my kids would be interrupting us both. And so we figured out there's going to be a mom day and a dad day, and we'll go back and forth. And the first couple of days we did this, it worked really well. I am shocked this isn't a bigger story, what's happening. I mean, I think my husband and I care a lot about our kids' education. They go to a wonderful school that's providing really good distance learning materials. I don't think that's true for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of kids don't have parents who can do this, or maybe, I don't want to judge why they're not doing it, but there are a lot of kids that are getting hurt by this closing of school, or they don't have good schools that are helping them out. And I think it should be a bigger story. And I'm kind of shocked that people don't care more about all these poor.
And I think there's another part to that story that's interesting. I think there'll be a lot of parents who are getting an education on what their children are being educated about at the moment. I think for people who have, been really busy with their own lives, they haven't got time to really dig into what the children are being taught, are now getting these worksheets home that I would say they're finding quite curious. I think there could be an interesting effect, in the election, where people are saying, hang on here, I had no idea that this is the kind of thing, where's Shakespeare or whatever. So I think that could be an interesting part of this story that'll be told afterwards. I mean, there's so many things that are going to change because of people's sudden education about these things. But anyway, that's a good tip. That's a good tip from you. Are you cooking a lot?
Yes, well, that's actually the other thing that I really like. So usually I'm at Fox during the evenings, and so as I've been doing that in recent years, my cooking evening meals has gone way down. But now that we have press conferences every night, I've been able to make many more meals, and I love cooking. So I love it so much. I mean, again, I hate to be glib about it because I know a lot of people are suffering, but this has been a very nice time for me to spend with my children and family, and just have things be a little slower pace.
Yeah, I think there's going to be, I think there's a lot of people, I would say, obviously the vast majority of families are happy families. And I have seen children around here with their mum and dad, like walking and stuff. And for children in a happy family, this is like Christmas every day. It's like mum and dad are home. It's really gorgeous. But obviously, as you indicate, and it's something that obviously we're all aware of, that not every family is a happy family. And that is an extraordinary nightmare that I can't even imagine how that's working out. We're going to finish up in a couple of seconds. What are the Hemingways watching? Have the Hemingways any recommendations for watching? Are you watching together as a family?
I'm embarrassed to tell you what was
do it.
The viewing choices for children my age are limited if you want. And so my daughters and I are watching a Hallmark series called When Calls the Heart.
It's fabulous.
It's not, and we're really enjoying it, though. And then my husband and I are very excited that the latest season of Bosch is back on. I think it's just a solid, police procedural, but I just really enjoy it. And so we're very happy to be watching that.
So it's When Calls the Heart on the Hallmark. Can I just say I'm not a fan of Bosch.
But you're a massive fan of Hallmark.
I'm a massive fan of Hallmark, actually, interestingly enough, and the romantic comedy.
Wait, mine
I just feel Bosch is
Wait,
kind of
why not a Bosch?
It's
I wanna
very
hear that.
police procedural, and it's kind of tourism of LA. It's going, oh, let's have this conversation, but let's make sure we do it in front of the Capitol Records building. And it's like, no, you can actually have that conversation. I just feel that sometimes the plot gets lost in the idea. Let's show LA, and to me, it just feels.
This doesn't stop you, though, Phelim, with us watching every last episode of Bosch.
That is,
let's be honest about that. And then, has there been anything? One of the things that I've thought has been quite extraordinary and a beautiful thing that's happened around the world is the availability of free stuff streaming that's being made. Like the Met have made operas available. Lots of art galleries have these virtual tours so that people can suddenly access stuff that they haven't. Have you accessed any of this free material that you could recommend to other people?
We've been doing a variety of museums that are sent out to the kids from their teachers. But I also like, if you have younger children, there's this daily art thing by Mo Willem, who's a children's book illustrator, and he just takes, like, for lunch each day, a half-hour instruction on how to draw cartoon characters. It's not high art, but it's actually fun, and the kids really enjoy it. So.
Oh my God, that's gorgeous. And by the way, can I just give, I don't know if you know this, by the way, did you know that you can freeze milk? I just want to I feel like it's my duty to tell everyone this because it was a huge revelation to me. And now I need to evangelize and tell other people about it because it really is a lifesaver. So if you didn't know that, that's my gift to you today.
No, that's good to know. I'll just add to that, and we come from my family likes to prep things anyway. I wouldn't call us preppers, but we like to be prepared. And I would just only say that dried milk also works well in many recipes. It's not great for drinking, but it works well in recipes.
Oh, so are you now going to confess that you're a little bit of a prepper?
My husband and I and our family are Lutheran, but he was raised in a Mormon household, and he thinks there are many benefits to being raised in a Mormon household, including that they have like a year's supply of food on hand at all times, just in case,
really?
there's a global pandemic or a neighbor needs stuff. So as soon as word got out, the first thing I did was like catalog what our dried food prep that we'd gotten from my in-laws was, and then how to add to it. But the key is to kind of use it. You don't just save it for when the pandemic strikes. You can actually use a lot of these freeze-dried or other things throughout the year.
We've noticed all our Jewish friends here in LA saw the pandemic coming long before anyone else. So I think if you're part of a persecuted religious minority, everyone's going, I told you so. I told you so. So I thank you very much. One question actually before you go. Get back kind of serious. Any plans for a future book? Anything bubbling or that you can talk about, or anything catching your eye these days?
No, not necessarily. There's always in the back of my mind, I think the definitive Russia story needs to be told. Yeah. It's hard for me to imagine how to tell that until we get to some kind of ending. And yes. I don't think we're at a proper ending. Yeah. But once that happens, I feel like there's got to be a use for all of this stuff that's in my head that I've been tracking for so many years.
True. Very true. And funny, I just want to say to people, if you want to know what Anne and I will be doing in 6 months' time, right? What play we'll be doing, what movie we'll be writing, just look at what Mollie Hemingway is writing about now. Right? Because basically our career is sort of 8 months ahead.
That's right, actually. That's actually, I didn't realize we were tag teaming because, Gosnell. Yeah, you're the one who started the Gosnell thing, and then we're like, we should make a movie about this. Yeah,
then FBI love, the Russia collusion. Next thing we're doing a play,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We all have a lot to thank the media for providing us with so much content. It's just like easy pickings to just say, oh, what are they doing? Okay, let's look at this. What horrible situation is happening? Well, let's write about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the FBI, I think Russia, I mean, you saw FBI, you were at the FBI Lovebirds in DC, and you spoke very favorably. And so, by the way, everyone, it's just been re-released on YouTube, FBILovebirds.com. But that is it's a ludicrous story, and I don't mean that in a critical way. I mean it in a entertaining way. It is. I mean, they sent a girl with a short skirt to talk, was it to George Papadopoulos, like a pretty girl in London, right?
A cocktail bar.
So, flicking her eyelashes out, whatever women do, I can't remember.
It's like 007, though,
yes,
Phelim.
yes. But flicking her, looking at him all gooey eyes, saying, "So, are you getting the emails from Russia to give to WikiLeaks?" And he's going, "No." And why is this attractive girl? He was so suspicious because an attractive girl was
Right, like something's going on here.
Yes, yeah. So there is a lot of rich pickings there for the next book and for the then our project based on your book.
Yeah, exactly. So get working there, Mollie, because we're looking for the next idea. So listen, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you again, and look forward to meeting you for a cocktail in DC when we get out of all of this.
Nice. But it is still, it's nice enough just to see you guys. So I hope you take care and continue your excellent work.
Thank you so much. Bye, Mollie. Bye, Mollie. Bye-bye. Take care.
We always try and keep our interviews short, but with Mollie,
we never succeed.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. It always runs longer than we planned. So I, for one, would love to read her book on the Russia hoax and then base my movie on it or my play on it. So watch out for that. We'll be putting a lot of pressure on her to do that, to fill that in. So now we go over to our interview with Marc Morano of Climate Depot. Mollie was great at looking at how activists are just replaying the old tired political and media strategy to push their agenda, the one that they've been pushing for years now. Marc is going to talk about how they're going to use that playbook to push their agenda in the future. So we spoke to Marc over Skype just before we came on air. So let's hear that interview now.
Well, hello. We're now joined by Marc Morano, former Republican political aide who founded and runs the website climatedepot.com. Has a career spanning working for Rush Limbaugh, which I didn't even know until I saw that on Wikipedia this morning, to working as Director of Communications for Republican Senator Jim Inhofe and Communications Director for the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee under George W. Bush administration. He's the author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming and the presenter of the documentary Climate Hustle, and Climate Hustle 2 is about to come out. But I prefer to just summarize all of that and boil it down to he is actually evil personified. So
yes, according to the Daily Cost, you are evil personified. We, as we said to Andrew Bolt when he came on, that it's in your contractual obligation when we signed you up that you have to be evil personified, for the duration of this this interview. So welcome, Marc.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Phelim. And I will live up to that evil name. I am more upset and worked up over this coronavirus situation lockdown than I have of anything else I've ever been upset about in the past, and politically speaking. I mean, this is just incredible. And thank you for that promo. Yeah, the book that updated 2019 with a bonus chapter on the Green New Deal. So we covered that, and the original book didn't have it. So we have a whole bonus chapter on that. So I consider the A to Z guide. Any parent out there needs this book and educate themselves, because their kids are being indoctrinated from kindergarten through college, both in school and in pop culture.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so we've known Marc for a long time, maybe 10 or 15 years actually, and we were in the Copenhagen Wars together. Do you remember that?
The good old days.
Remember waiting outside a room for Al Gore to come out and to chase him down a hallway?
Yes, I remember two things about that. One was you asking about the polar bears to Al Gore, and him actually being forced to answer you. They never would have let. Then, of course, you getting shut down. But that was one of the. I mean, you can look at Al Gore's whole career. Phelim, you cracked the code. It's almost impossible to get to Al Gore on camera like that and force him.
That was at the Society for Environmental Journalists. Actually, that was really when I first came on the scene in the United States. We went to the Society of Environmental Journalists in Wisconsin. It's very interesting. He felt, and everyone else felt, that the safest place he would be, where he would only get softball questions, was a room full of journalists. The thing you have to remember is this was the Society of Environmental Journalists. So these are environmental activists pretending to be journalists. Yeah. And when I got him on the ropes and really got him, and we might play a little bit of that. Actually, let's play a little bit of that clip.
A judge in the British High Court, after a lengthy hearing, found there were 9 significant errors. This has been shown to children. Do you accept those findings, and have you done anything to correct those errors?
Well, I'm not going to go through all of those. The ruling was in favor of the movie, by the way, and the ruling was in favor of showing the movie in schools. And That's really the bottom line on that. There's been such a long discussion of each one of those specific things. One of them, for example, was that polar bears, if I remember correctly, it's been a long time ago, that polar bears really aren't endangered. Well, the polar bears didn't get that word. So...
Well, the number of polar bears have increased, actually, and are increasing.
You don't think they're endangered, do you?
The number of polar bears have increased.
Do you think they're endangered?
The number of polar bears have increased. I mean,
All right,
if the number of polar bears increase, surely they're not endangered.
As you can see there, when I got him on the ropes and was forcing the question, what did the Society of Environmental Journalists do? They cut the mic. They cut my mic. And no one followed up with a question. And I remember then, we're kind of getting a little distracted here. Yes. I remember then, Society of Environmental Journalists phoned me up because about my membership and said, will you agree to abide by the rules? And I'm going, of course, I always abide by rules. That's why I'm applying, but will you agree to abide by the rules and not shut down hard questions of your favourite guests? So good to have you back, Marc. And let's talk now let's not talk about our past glories. Let's talk about the future. So the whole world is shut down right now. Millions have lost work. It's been unprecedented restrictions on our freedom, our right to work, right to travel. Many people have accepted that based on models, based on models from Imperial College, that by now millions will be dead. These models have been shown to be inaccurate and not correct. So what lessons can we take from the apocalyptic global warming models that used to they had us dead by now, but people said, oh, it's actually 10 years from now. What's the story?
Well, in my book, first of all, Phelim, I have a whole chapter on modeling. It's that important. And just in the climate debate, to start out with, when current reality fails to alarm, make scarier and scarier predictions of the future. Now, we showed the polar bear clip. That's a perfect example of how they use models. If you have a record number, and by the way, since you did that interview, polar bear numbers have shot through the highest estimates ever, at or near historic population highs, according to everyone who counts them. So how do you scare people about the polar bear? You come up with a model that says by 2050, by 2075, our predictions now are more dire than they were just 10 years ago. You're like, well, wait, there's more polar bears than ever. Yeah, but our predictions are scarier than just 5 or 10 years ago. That's how a model works. First of all, models can be very useful tools and help people. Although even in engineering, an ocean dike wall production, there was a scientist named Orrin Pilkey who said he called it useless arithmetic. That even in that kind of more focused, less variable modeling, when you're dealing with dikes and other things, the arithmetic is almost useless. So then when you extend that to climate, with literally the hundreds of factors and beyond stuff you don't even account for, it becomes nothing more actually than a tool to help the narrative. In other words, you have a UN climate summit coming up. Let's do a series of modeling studies to scare the hell out of people. Now, the way this applies to the COVID-19 coronavirus, the novel virus, like they like to say, is very simple. We had the public health bureaucracy, and this is the only thing I'm really upset at is they have a high approval rating, the NIH and the public health bureaucrats, from the public, similar in Republicans and Democrats, and I can't remember, it's near 80%. No one has any reason to question them. These are medical health professionals. These are the same self-interested lobbyists. You can look back and, just recently, these vaping deaths we had in America. The CDC knowingly said, we don't know what's causing it. They knew what was causing it. They turned out to be illegal black market marijuana vapes bought off the street. But they said everyone should stop vaping and then go back to essentially traditional cigarettes. The FDA actually came out and said, no, that's not the case. So you had the CDC going months longer as an example. Because why? Because there's a whole public health campaign. It's about lobbying, narrative. They are willing to bend and juice stats, data, and the science in order to achieve political ends, the same as in climate. So when Neil Ferguson came out with the 2.2 number, that was the wake-up moment for Donald Trump, for other governments around the world. We have a catastrophe coming. We need to shut down. This is like something we've never seen. This is worse than the Spanish flu outbreak, 1917, 1918. And they used the model. Again, remember, when current reality fails to alarm, come up with a scary model. All we had at that point was some dodgy scary stuff going on in China. No one was sure what was happening in Wuhan. The Chinese government lies like they always do. So we had this model, and this was the basis for the complete stripping of civil liberties and economics and economic liberty for, I want to say, billions of people around the world. Yeah. And of course, it turned out to be wildly wrong. And now they've revised it, and they continue to revise it downwards.
But I mean, we've noticed this with the environmental movement all along. Being an environmentalist, being a modeler means never having to say you're sorry. No one ever picks them up. We make a mistake, it haunts us for decades. They make a mistake, they get more money in grants.
And also it's a thing that it's like the pessimist gets really rewarded in this environment. So, those predictions were wildly pessimistic. As you say, 2 million people were going to die in the United States of America. 500,000 people were going to die in the United Kingdom. And then Neil Ferguson ends up looking good in the way, because it's like, yeah, but because I said that, we did all these mitigating things. We locked you all in your homes, and that's the reason why so few people have died. So he wins no matter what. What do you say to that?
You're absolutely right. They will admit, they'll say, in fact, Al Gore has said this to the UN reports. He said, of course, and this was Al Gore's own quote, the reports are, quote, torqued up. How else do you get the attention of policymakers? That is an almost verbatim quote of Al Gore describing the UN process. Al Gore is saying that the Nobel Peace Prize winning scientists, the world's top scientists, as people like John Kerry and Greta Thunberg say, are willing to juice up the science and the stats in order to scare people so that they will get the notice of politicians. That's Al Gore explaining it. It's the exact same thing with big public health bureaucracies. They need to get attention. They need the power. They crave it. These are people that sit their entire lives. They look at the data and the studies of the world, and they say, this needs to happen. This needs to happen. I have a professor of sustainability from Boston University. One of my headlines this week at Climate Depot. He's literally calling for a massive, essentially masterminding from above, based on both climate and the coronavirus, done by these enlightened intellectuals, our betters, if you will, who are going to manage and aspect every single aspect of our lives. And that's what the models are designed to do, is scare us to give up our rights, to give up our liberties, because you need that crisis. You don't let the crisis go to waste. And there's no better example of that $2.2 million number, 2.2 people number. And you are absolutely right, Ann. No matter what happens, they can claim they were successful. In other words, if 2.2 million people were to die, hey, we predicted it, which it wasn't going to happen. And if only, much less died, they're going to say, well, it's a good thing, everyone listened to us, we were right. And then the original thing is, we'll have a 15-day lockdown, then we'll extend that. There was no criteria, because if there's no deaths, that's because the lockdown's working. Let's keep it going. And if there's a lot of deaths, well, we need more lockdown because there's deaths. So no matter what, the 15-day lockdown was a lie based on models, and the government authorities knew that was never going to be lifted after 15 days, because this is about the faceless bureaucrats, ultimately their entire lives waiting to fix us, the unwashed masses, and make us compliant with the way we should be. And that includes what cars we should drive, appliances, how we should do, what vaccines, what certificates we're going to need to get jobs again that show we're all clear from the government, from the virus. This is not a fictional novel. This is George Orwell's 1984 in reality.
Talking of compliance, because of the dangers posed by the virus, the governments have seized, extraordinary powers. Cities have seized extraordinary powers to curtail us, lock us in our homes, close beaches, close parks, stop social gatherings, arrest you for walking in the wrong place, sitting on a bench. So, is this a dry run for public health measures to mitigate the damage of global warming?
Well, it's the fantasy of every progressive left-wing public health bureaucrat. Steve Malloy, who does junk science, said it best. He said he doesn't know of a single conservative libertarian left in the public health field. Anyone in it would have been drummed out, marginalized, and ignored. He said the same way very few, if any, teachers that belong to the NEA, National Education Association, who are conservative or libertarian. They are not welcome. There will not be relevant. So what's happened is you have all these people who have amassed power with one single ideology, which is essentially, we know better. We need to manage every aspect of people's lives for public health and safety. One of the great examples here is and you look at this with the old 55-mile-an-hour speed limit here in the United States. If it saves one life, it's worth it. Well, now, they finally got overturned back, I believe, in the late 80s. And now you have states like Montana with 80, 90-mile-an-hour speed limits. But if we really cared about saving one life, why not bring the speed limit down to 25? We could save a ton of lives because we know that there's a certain cost to freedom. There's a certain cost to not living under house arrest. And quarantining is when you quarantine sick people. Authoritarianism is when you quarantine healthy people. And that's what's happened here. This is frightening. And some of these governors we've exposed as petty despots here in the United States, like the governors of New Jersey, New York, Michigan, Virginia, and others.
You're bringing us to exactly where I wanted to come to in the conversation now, because we tend to be optimists over here at the Ann and Phelim Scoop. That's kind of just, the joke we have that Magda started was that we're the people who always have the glass half full. Yeah, we're the half full glass people here. Is it possible, by the way, that this, that a silver lining from this awful pandemic that has hurt so many people, is it possible that something good could come? And here's a couple of suggestions, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Number one, parents all over the United States are getting a very swift education right now on what their children are being educated about, because they're seeing worksheets coming from school, and I think they might be getting an interesting education there. That's one possibility that could be very good. And as we talked about earlier, that people is it possible that people will be more skeptical of models in the future? And is it possible as well that people are becoming intolerant of these draconian laws all over the place and won't tolerate it again? That's our happy twist to this. Is that possible?
Well, I think it's very possible. I think if you remember here in the United States, we had the Tea Party movement after President Obama rammed down Obamacare and the big federal stimulus in 2009. There was such a backlash. And again, that's Washington fiscal, healthcare does affect everyone outside of Washington, but it's still an inside the beltway, the way Obama went about it. But I think we are looking at potentially the backlash in terms of pro-liberty, pro-freedom that could dwarf the Tea Party movement in 2010, which was hugely significant. It turned the Congress back and it rebuked President Obama and essentially handicapped him. He had to force everything from executive orders from then on after he lost both houses. But here's the thing. I think when people lose the ability to go out for a run, when they lose the ability to walk to the park with their dog or their kid, when they see government officials like Mayor de Blasio urging fellow New Yorkers to snitch on which is the hallmark of any totalitarian government, is to urge citizen against citizen in service of the state. In my movie, Climb and Hustle 2, which features Kevin Sorbo, which that has been postponed to October because of the theaters closing, we have a whole running theme of how the climate movement, and you could replace that with the lockdown movement now, are all following George Orwell's 1984 on almost every aspect. It's a totalitarian control. I interviewed Václav Klaus on this. And I think one of the things Václav Klaus talks about is the inspiration and hope of seeing all the atrocities and then the freedom, the rebellion that leads to the freedom eventually. So I'm hoping, like you're saying, and that one of the biggest factors will be people that have just never experienced government at this level and in this intrusiveness, and this will have a huge blowback, particularly in those states with these governors. And also colleges, there's no reason to send your kid off to these expensive colleges. A lot of this can be done online, and I think there's going to be a lot of revamping there. So that is another positive development to possibly come out of this.
So we're coming to the end. We're running out of time, but we always ask our guests, there's two questions we always ask our guests, and actually more relevant now than ever. So what is your go-to recipe that you're famous for in your home? What is it that Marc Morano cooks that everyone in your home says, Mark, would you please make this? Or Daddy, would you please make this?
Well, interesting. I don't know how much it's not as popular as it should be, but I've always been known for 2 decades now making the buckwheat high fiber pancakes on Saturday morning. And I say they stick in your stomach like a hunk of concrete. And for some reason, my kids and wife just don't think that sounds too appetizing. But I always say this is the healthy pancake, and here you can put a lot of syrup on it. But I've made that every Saturday for almost 2 decades, or more than 2 decades now. And that's it. But I can't say that it's a huge favorite. But it's my most famous recipe.
Kids are such a disappointment sometimes, aren't they?
And by the way, that sounds, in some circles, I think that sounds like child abuse because he's making it for 2 decades, even though he's not getting a massive response.
It's called gaslighting.
It is, yeah. It's like, oh no, Daddy's making those pancakes again. We want the recipe anyway. By the way, and then our second question to everyone is there a piece of art, a poem, a movie, a sculpture, a painting, any piece of art that is important to you that you'd like to share with everyone?
Well, you mentioned movie. I mean, my favorite genre of movie are the old film noirs from the 1940s, 1950s. One of my favorite movies, Murder My Sweet, The Big Sleep with Humphrey Bogart. So that's always been, that's one of the greatest German expressionism, the filming style with the shadows and the lighting. One of the greatest cinematic tour de forces are those movies, especially from that era.
That's fantastic. And what have you guys as a family, have you any tips for being at home? Have you got any games that you're playing, or are you watching movies together as a family? Any tips for people stuck in quarantine together with their children?
I'm a little tired. Last night we slept out in the backyard in a tent, which on an air mattress, which was actually overinflated. But it was a lot of fun. So no, actually, in a way, it helps you focus better. I'm doing a lot of research right now. You don't have a lot of distractions. The kids, my 9-year-old son is like, this is the greatest thing ever. I hope coronavirus never goes away because he doesn't like school. So he's loving it. Unfortunately, I have a daughter who's a senior in high school, and this was her big, prom and graduation. So she's taking it the hardest, and it's hard to imagine what she must be going through. And then I have 2 other kids who don't seem to mind missing school much. So I think right now a lot of the younger kids are just happy school's canceled.
It's funny. I said that the other day, that it's like, I see families together, fathers with their children hand in hand with the mom and stuff. And I'm thinking for a lot of families, it's like, it's a really happy time to be together. It's like this special time. And I'm sure the school are going to be great about doing the prom. They're going to do that. They're totally not going to have a class that won't have a prom. They're just going to do it at a weird time.
It might be July, is what they're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've run out of time. Marc, thank you so much for joining us today. We want to keep in touch with you. We want to know more about Climate Hustle 2. We want to know more about books. I think you were hinting at a new book that you're working on, so we want to know more about that, and we'll definitely have you back on. And hopefully we're going to see you in freedom very soon, Marc, and have a glass of wine.
Check out my website this week. I have a whole report on all the UN officials, Al Gore, Obama, everyone basically tying the coronavirus to climate change and saying we have a lot of lessons to learn and this is great and we can keep this going, because if they have a virus emergency, they want us to do the same stuff for the climate emergency. So I have all the actual I's dotted and T's crossed in the report.
Actually, I'm actually really glad you said that, because it reminds me to just say to everyone to go to Climate Depot. It's a really fabulous resource, and there's so much great reading every day there. And I just as you say, exactly, because I'd read about that Boston professor. So please go to climatedepot.com. It is just the most invaluable one-stop shop for everything that's being said about the climate, and it's really, really valuable, and it's a valuable service to the country and to the world. So thank you for that, Marc.
Thank you very much. I'm encouraging civil disobedience. I'm telling my kids, don't listen to the governor. You have my permission to violate it. We've had kids over. We've been doing all kinds of different things. I'm doing social distancing, but I cannot handle stay-at-home orders by the government. I'm not going to do it, and there's no proof that helps fight a virus.
Yeah.
Okay, Marc, thanks very much, and we'll talk to you soon. Right. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was a great interview with Marc Morano. Absolutely fantastic. So, I'm sorry, we have really run over time today, but we've come to the end of the show. Please remember, by the way, that we have a daily podcast called The Daily Virus. It's the Anne and Phelim Scoop Daily Virus. Each day of the pandemic, reporting news, advice, madness of this extraordinary time in history of the virus. And there's the cats just jumped up onto the table to join us. And on a last note, we just thought, if you really want to escape the pandemic and get some entertainment that we've actually found very soothing, because we've been looking for entertainment and found, not impressed with the complete catalogue of Netflix or Amazon. We've really have enjoyed 90 Day Fiancé on TLC, and we'll talk more about 90 Day Fiancé actually in the next show. But for now, we just want to say to everyone out there, please stay safe and well and be happy, and try not to eat ice cream every possible day, and try to get out of the house every day, and try not to get arrested. So take care. God bless. Bye.
Bye, and don't forget to leave ratings on the Apple Podcast app and leave a comment. Thank you. Bye. Stay safe.